Greetings, conversationalists. Welcome. It is Erick Erickson here across the United States of America. The phone number, if you want to be on the program, 877-973-7425, 877-97-ERICK, E-R-I-C-K. In fact, if you text Erick to 33777, you can get the live stream, the show notes, the podcast, the social media links, and so much more. Well, okay. So I made the news this morning, and we might as well talk about me being the news story of the day. I talked to folks within the Trump administration to try to understand why we would vote with Russia, Belarus, and North Korea against a resolution calling Russia the aggressor in Ukraine. I want to explain to you the thinking of the Trump administration from talking to multiple people within the Trump administration on their thinking for voting against that resolution. Now, I know what happens when I do this. People see an excerpt of this and they say, oh, you're a Trump apologist, you're a Trump defender. Why are you defending Hitler? Or the Trump guys get mad when I say, look, I disagree. And here's why I disagree. Oh, you're never a Trumper or whatever. I would just note that all the people who call me never a Trumper never gave Donald Trump as much money as I did, but they just can't let the past go and recognize realignment. But I am perfectly comfortable disagreeing with the Trump administration and perfectly willing to tell you, even as I can analyze their thinking and talk to people, many of whom are longtime friends of mine, about the thinking, so at least you understand their thinking. So all of those caveats getting into here, let's say, whether you agree or disagree, and let me stake out my position and plant my flag at the beginning, just so you know, I can disagree while also be as fair and objective as possible in navigating the situation. I do not think the United States of America should ever side with Russia, Belarus, and North Korea, three of the biggest authoritarian regimes on planet Earth. Even China and Iran had the good sense to abstain from the UN General Assembly resolution calling for an end to the war in Ukraine and noting Russia as the aggressor. Marco Rubio essentially said the resolution had too many aggressive words in it. That was his public statement. The fact of the matter is Russia is the aggressor, and this language does matter for purposes of international law, where if the United Nations says Russia is the aggressor, when the war is over and territory is ceded from Russia, Ukraine still maintains a claim to it, and that essentially gets to where we're headed with the logic here. So I don't think it's a good day when the United States sides with three tyrannies around the world, all three of which have invaded Ukraine. We actually sided with the three countries that have invaded Ukraine, and I don't think that's a good look for us. But I recognize there is a method to the madness. Whether I agree or not with the resolution, I understand there's a method to the madness here. It is not contrary to claims. It is not contrary to claims that we're doing the bidding of Russia. And I need to pause here and say this. There are many, many, many people who are absolutely convinced because of their hatred of Donald Trump that he is somehow in Vladimir Putin's pocket. Vladimir Putin has a P-tape on him or something. I don't think that's the case at all. And I think the gut reaction of, oh, we're carrying water for Russia because there are people in the Trump administration who believe we can somehow bring Russia back into the Western fold and back into Europe, or because of cultural issues that they are sympathetic to Russia. People have persistently been poisoned on the idea of Donald Trump and Russia. And I don't think Donald Trump is a traitor to the United States. I do not think Donald Trump is in Russia's pocket. I think that Donald Trump oftentimes sees the world differently from many other people, particularly among the elite and the establishment, and decides to rethink issues. And there used to be a time in this country where people were heralded for rethinking issues, and Donald Trump gets sorely attacked. There are times I agree with him. There are times I disagree with him, and I'm willing to tell you which is which. But I'm also willing to explain the thinking, and let me do that for you with the Ukraine situation. What Donald Trump is doing on the world stage is recognizing we have a problem left over from the Obama administration. The problem is that Barack Obama made a conscious decision when he was president that we should end the two-war doctrine. The two-war doctrine had been settled American military doctrine since the end of World War II that the United States, at all times and all ways, should be prepared to fight a war and win a war on two fronts at the same time. Our entire military buildup post-World War II was about being able to fight in the Pacific theater and the Atlantic theater, in Europe and in Asia at the same time, concurrently, and win both wars. And what Barack Obama, genius military pothead strategist that he was, decided is that what the United States should be able to do is fight two wars at one time, hold one front long enough to win the other war, and then redivert the resources to the other front and win it. There is a growing belief in the United States military that we don't have the capacity to do that right now, and we haven't for some time. The supply chain is screwed up. Shipbuilding is off the rails. It's not good. Military aircraft aren't functional. We've got all sorts of problems in addition to recruitment problems. And right now, the United States sees China as the biggest threat. So what Donald Trump would like to do is resolve a situation in Europe so that he can pivot to dealing with the problems that are coming up in the Pacific. That you have to understand as a presuppositional thinking to everything else is the Trump administration's primary concern is China, not Russia. We'll get into why I disagree a little bit later, but that's your presupposition to understand everything else. So, with that being the concerns, here's why we voted against the resolution in the United Nations. One, the Trump administration believes, and they're not wrong, that Ukraine has been trying to essentially win a PR war, not just a real war. They want a PR war with the West, and so Ukraine was the agent behind the resolution, they say, got European powers on board, and this was all about a performative statement, not a real thing. Whether the resolution passed or failed was meaningless, but Ukraine could feel like it got a PR victory. Donald Trump doesn't want to give Ukraine PR victories. Donald Trump wants to end a war. By siding with Russia, Belarus, and North Korea, he's signaling to Ukraine, your PR stunts are over. You're going to come to a table and negotiate. The other thing is they want the Europeans to understand. In fact, we passed a Security Council resolution, which is binding. General Assembly resolutions of the UN not binding. Security Council resolutions are. The Security Council resolution calls for an end to the war and does not assign blame. The European powers abstained from it. They could have vetoed it, and they didn't. They abstained from it. Russia and the United States voted for a resolution calling for an end to the war. What Donald Trump is doing with that is signaling to Europe that if you want to keep the war going, you're going to pay for it. We're done paying for it. If you want to keep investing in Ukraine and keep sending arms to Ukraine, go for it, but we're done. The third thing that Donald Trump wanted to do by siding with the Russians was to tell the Russians very visibly, through performance, we're not Joe Biden. You can come sit at the table with us and negotiate. The Putin regime would not in any way, shape, or form sit down with the Biden regime to have any sort of peaceful negotiation. What Donald Trump, by siding with the Russians on these resolutions, was saying is like, listen, we're willing to give you a fair hearing. We're not Joe Biden. So to Ukraine, no PR wins. You're going to have to sit at the table. To Russia, you can sit at the table with us. And to Europe, we're not going to play this game anymore. If you want to fund the war, we're done. In the back of all of the thinking is this. We must resolve the situation in Europe so we can turn our attention to China while we try to rebuild our military to go back to a two-front, two-war doctrine. Again, you can disagree with their thinking. You can disagree, and I do disagree with them siding with Russia, Belarus, and North Korea when even China and Iran said, we're not touching that. But I at least understand their thinking. Now, there's a caveat to the thinking that you also have to understand, and this from multiple people inside the Trump administration. They believe Donald Trump wants to try to find a peaceful resolution, and Donald Trump wants to show he can do this, just like he did with the Abraham Accords. Concurrently, very few people in the Trump administration actually trust the Russians. In fact, it is members of the Trump administration who make the most persuasive case for Vladimir Putin not wanting to end the war. So how does all this resolve itself? Because there's a paradox here. Trump wants to end the war. Vladimir Putin might not want to end the war. Trump is siding with the Russians to get him to the table, and the Russians may drag it out. So what do you do? And the bottom line is that if it becomes clear to the Trump administration that Vladimir Putin has no desire to really end the war, that we will move swiftly and decisively to help Ukraine. We will, after all, have mineral rights in Ukraine. Here's where I stake out my position. Putin doesn't want to end the war for a couple of reasons. Putin is very convinced he can still win this war. Putin is fed, remember, a lot of information that's not quite accurate. But Putin believes that he can wear down American resolve to help in Ukraine, and that it is only the American arsenal that is allowing Ukraine to stay relevant in the fight. Right now, Ukraine is firing parity bullets at Russia. Bullet for bullet, Ukraine can reciprocate with Russia. For a time there, when our aid slowed down during government shutdown debates and things like that, for every 7 bullets that Russia was firing, Ukraine was firing 3, and Ukraine fell back. Now, just at parity, Ukraine has advanced again. The Ukrainians are outperforming their manpower in a way the Russians can't. The other reason that Vladimir Putin wants to stay in the fight is because he doesn't want to resettle thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of criminal soldiers who've now fought on a battlefield are no longer scared of death and willing to commit crimes. He doesn't want those people repatriating to Russia. He wants them to stay in Ukraine. So either he's going to leave them there if we do a land swap with Ukraine for settlement, or he's going to keep the war going. But Putin, at the end of the day, is still convinced he can win the war. He could also win the war by doing something like the Budapest Accord, where Ukraine, remember, they gave up their armaments, they gave up their nukes. The U.S. and Russia said, we'll protect you. The Russians didn't protect them. Instead, they invaded and took Crimea. Vladimir Putin is playing a much longer game, and that's the other thing that the Trump administration is aware of, is they are playing a 4-year game, because then Donald Trump is out of office. Vladimir Putin, God knows how long he stays in office. He's a dictator. But ultimately, what all of this is about is Trump wants a good faith effort to try to bring peace to Ukraine, showing Ukraine you actually are going to have to give up territory if you want peace. The war must come to an end, and if it's not going to come to an end, the Europeans are going to have to front the war. We're not covering the cost of the war anymore. We'll certainly sell arms to the Europeans who can redirect it to the Ukrainians, but we're not doing direct aid for Ukraine. That's got to be up to Europe. And if Europe wants our weapons, they're going to buy it from us. We're not going to do a loan program or a grant program. The presuppositional undercurrent for everything, though, is China. We're not prepared for a two-front war. We're not prepared to hold on one front and win on another front right now. And we're not prepared for what's coming from China that has invaded our digital infrastructure, is still within our telecom system, listening to every conversation you and I have. We're not prepared for it. And the Trump administration believes we have to be done with the distraction of Ukraine, which is a distraction in their mind, to prepare for China. I think it's a reasonable proposition, except for one thing. It is very clear at this point that China, Russia, North Korea, the Iranians, the Venezuelans, and a number of other countries have formed an alliance. They're not independent actors at this point. They're working in concert with each other, and they're working against us. And they think Donald Trump is a fool, and they're trying to play him for a fool. And they think that if Russia can drag out these peace negotiations, distracting us, it allows China time to maneuver in Asia. And I would be very weary, if I were the Trump administration, of looking on this as any sort of meaningful conversation, because I think the deal has already been struck and the die has already been cast with this Eastern Axis, and that we need to move very quickly to rebuild our military as quickly as possible. And frankly, it is in our advantage to allow the Ukrainians to kill as many Russians as possible because of what's about to come, which is this Russian-Chinese axis of power in the East. I got to just give you this. You know what a presupposition is? A presupposition is a foundational idea you have to shape the rest of your thinking. Like, for example, in everything I do or say, my worldview involves the idea that presuppositionally, I believe there is a God, I believe in Jesus, I believe he died and rose again from the dead, and I believe my entire world and actions and comportment in life have to be guided by that. And that is a presuppositional, foundational belief for everything I do. That's a presupposition, a roundabout way of explaining it. You have to understand A presuppositional view within this Trump administration is China is the biggest threat. China is the biggest threat. And that explains everything they're doing. It explains why they want peace with Russia in Ukraine. You and I can say that's naive because Russia and China are working together, and I do believe they are. I do believe there are these Axis powers growing, China, Russia, North Korea, Iran, Venezuela, Cuba. They are out to undermine us on the world stage, economically, the monetary system, with defense. But you got to understand the Trump administration presuppositional belief coming in is that the Democrats gutted the military. The Democrats made us weaker as a nation, and we are not prepared for a massive world war that China and Russia want to lead. We got to be able to deal with China, and the Chinese have infiltrated our technology networks to such an extent we are having real trouble getting them out of the system. As long as you understand that's their presuppositional belief that's guiding the entirety of their foreign policy and military policy, you can make some sense of what's going on in the world with them, as opposed to just saying it's all about Russia, when really it's not. It's about China. One of my many frustrations with the United States Congress is that the Republicans, internally, it's so difficult to deal with each other that we lost Mike Gallagher. Gallagher was the young congressman from Wisconsin who the Republicans and Democrats together explicitly and implicitly trusted enough to do a very fair special committee investigation into China. He was a partisan, but he was a straight shooter. The Democrats knew that if Mike Gallagher said something was a big deal, it was a big deal. And the Republicans knew if Mike Gallagher said something was a big deal, it was a big deal. He was a Republican congressman, and he got so tired of the poop show of how Republicans were running Congress, he just threw up his hands and said, might as well go out in the world and make some real money. I see where this thing is headed. Very interestingly, he went to Palantir, which is a big defense company, specializing in looking at drones and things like that, intelligence, information in the digital age. He also writes in the Wall Street Journal, and he's got a piece today I want to just spend some time with you on. Bring warriors back to the U.S. military. That's the headline. When it comes to military recruitment, President Biden left President Trump a flaming bag of you-know-what on the White House steps. Mr. Biden sapped the ranks of America's military when he discharged more than 8,000 members for noncompliance with his COVID-19 vaccine mandate. These dismissals compounded the morale catastrophe of the Pentagon's diversity, equity, and inclusion push, best understood as a pseudo-scientific attempt to favor loyalists at the expense of merit-based promotions and military readiness. The Navy and Air Force missed their recruiting targets in fiscal 2023 for the first time this century. The Army missed its enlistment goals in 2022 and 2023, and the Marine Corps barely met their target in 2024. The most advanced weapons systems are useless unless talented, motivated soldiers are there to operate them. Any military recruitment crisis emboldens America's enemies. Resolving the Biden-created recruiting crisis is as important as securing our borders. Thankfully, we're now seeing a Trump bump in recruitment. The 2024 Reagan National Defense Survey found from November 2023 to November 2024, willingness to serve among adults under 30 increased from 10% to 16%. The Army announced its best December recruiting numbers in 12 years and its best January recruiting numbers in 15 years. As Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth tweeted, America's youth want to serve under the bold and strong America First leadership of Donald Trump. Bringing back service members who were unjustly discharged over vaccine refusals will help. Abolishing DEI can't come a moment too soon. But Mr. Hegseth shouldn't take down the help wanted sign yet. The Army, the largest military branch, has the fewest active duty soldiers since World War II. Army Secretary nominee Daniel Driscoll told senators during his confirmation hearing last month, after failing to meet its recruiting goal of 65,000 in 2023, the Army decreased it to 55,000 in 2024. For 2025, it's 61,000. Equally worrisome, military recruitment may now be contingent on who sits in the Oval Office. Veterans, whose family members represent nearly 80% of recent recruits, are increasingly unlikely to recommend military service if they disagree politically with the president. The 2024 survey of military veterans found that 65% of liberal veterans, but only 53% of conservative veterans would recommend service to their family members. By February 2025, after Mr. Trump's inauguration, nearly 75% of conservative veterans, but just over 30% of liberal veterans, said they'd advise their family members to join. The most notable point here is that when a liberal is president, a majority of conservative veterans and a majority of liberal veterans say go serve. When a conservative is president, a majority of conservative veterans still say go serve, but less than a third of liberal ones do. Who are the patriots? More importantly, we got real problems. DEI did discourage people from joining. Now, a lot of progressives, they don't want to confront DEI in the military. They don't want to confront what it did, but you talk to soldiers over the last 4 years of the Biden administration, they spent almost as much time being told how racist white people were than how to use a gun or how to fight a war. They were indoctrinated on a regular level by the Biden administration. They regularly did workshops on systemic racism within the military and their privilege. White privilege lectures in the military. You're willing to go die for your country in a third world hellhole, and before you go, they want you to know you're going because of your white privilege. You get to go die in some third world slum because you're full of white privilege and you're systemically racist and don't even know it. That was the message. On top of that, many of the people promoted within the Biden administration in the military did it to meet racial quota goals, not because they were the best people. I can't tell you the number of people in the military I've talked to in the last 4 years who that was their singular frustration. They felt like the people over them weren't the best people. They happened to be the people of the right ethnicity. That deeply frustrated them. You're going to take an order from someone you know wasn't the smartest guy in the room. He got promoted because he happened to meet a quota. Not something you really signed on for. And there are larger issues. China being first and foremost with them. China being a big issue. We need a bigger military. We need more people. Gallagher has some ideas. He says he joined the Marines in 2006 because I expected I'd be pushed to my limit. Why not launch a campaign presenting military service as the highest expression of national duty and personal honor? 4-star officers, senior enlisted leaders, service chiefs, decorated combat veterans could speak directly to high school students, sports team, and community groups. No apologies tours. Framing service as a rite of passage for America's toughest, most patriotic youth. Ads should lead with combat-first messaging. They should emphasize the realities of military life, grit, sacrifice, honor, and patriotism. They should highlight elite units and battle-hardened leaders as aspirational figures. America has no warrior caste, but family members of veterans account for the majority of military recruits. Now, think about this. We used to have be all you can be. Remember that back when it was high school and college? Be all you could be. Join the Army. And they showed young men crawling through mud and climbing over wood towers and barriers and climbing up trees and jumping out of airplanes and be all you can be. Join the Army. It was a ad campaign. And what did Joe Biden do? I went into the Army so I could get my transgender surgery and learn how to program a computer. From be all you can be, join the Army, to get your transgender surgery and learn how to computer program. Slay queens. I think go back to the Army is for tough people. Think about the Marine ads. You know my buddy Rich McCormick. Rich McCormick had the controversial town hall the media's made great hay out of that voters are angry when really it's just a bunch of CDC employees who are upset. Remember the ad from the 90s? Well, some of you won't. Philip only was like 2. But back in the 90s, there was a very famous ad for the Marines, and it was a knight on a chessboard. The knight was Rich McCormick, who's now the congressman. It was a very famous ad for the Marines. You get on YouTube, Marine Knight, not N-I-G-H-T, K-N-I-G-H-T, for those of you in Rio Linda. Marine Knight ad, and you'll see Rich McCormick there. It was a powerful ad, a Marine recruiting ad that we need tough strategic thinkers to be in the Marines. Instead of the diversity quota ads, okay, I've got the Asian female, I've got the Asian Hispanic blended male, I've got the clearly black guy in the background on the bokeh, a little out of focus. We'll have a couple of white dudes. And now they're going to talk about how they learned sewing skills within the military while they worked on their GEDs. That's not really the ad you want. Gallagher's right. Bring back the tough guys, because we need tough guys and strategic thinkers in the military right now with what's coming. What is coming? What's coming is going to be the most high-tech warfare we have ever seen. The Chinese are right now listening to me. They don't want to be listening to me right now, and they don't really care what I say. But there are about 20,000 people this very second live streaming me on their cell phone in just a single state. And any streaming communication going over a phone right now, the Chinese have access to and can listen to, because they have infested our telecom system, our cell phone networks, and our internet carriers, and they have every single digital packet that goes across the internet they have access to right now. The Chinese are in our water supply system. The Chinese are in our power grid right now, and they're waiting for the day they attack Taiwan, and they're going to flip the switch and shut down all of our cell phones, all of our water systems, and all of our power grid, so that we have to respond here and we'll be too distracted to respond there. We need tough men to kill bad guys, and we also need smart men to kill the hackers, to get at them digitally. Gallagher should be taken seriously on this. We need a new ad campaign. The woke nonsense from the Biden administration drove off a whole lot of people. I just think the data is very interesting and staggering, that it does not matter who the president of the United States is. A majority of self-identified conservative veterans tell their family members join the military. Only when a liberal Democrat is president do the liberal veterans tell their kids to join the military. They don't really want their kids to go fight and die on the battlefield. They want their kids to go get a scholarship and go learn how to computer program and maybe get their transgender surgery taken care of. So the conservatives always are willing to die for their country. It's very telling. But listen, don't be mad at me for putting it that way. That's what the data says. That's what the data says. When a Republican is president, less than a third of liberal veterans will tell their kids and grandkids to join the military. It's always over 50% for conservatives, and you should be catering to that demographic. Be all you can be. Join the army and kill bad guys for your country. Or, as Mike Gallagher says, Ernest Shackleton's legendary ad, if not really true, was men wanted for hazardous journeys. That's what we need in the military. And we need to build up real fast and then find a bunch of these warriors who know how to build a ship and a submarine, because our contractors right now have forgotten how to do that. I never really feel good about someone losing their job. There, but by the grace of God go I. At the same time, she needed to be gone. So I can feel bad someone's lost their job, but also think it needed to happen. I can be sympathetic, but also think, my gosh, the woman was a train wreck, and her show was terrible. It was completely race-driven, racial theater. But what's the problem is at MSNBC is the network is led by such strong personalities who have hijacked the network. So Rachel Maddow went on a massive tirade last night about Joy Reid being let go. Now, listen, I don't want to play you audio from MSNBC if I can help it. I've got some audio of Hakeem Jeffries, who was on with Rachel Maddow, but I try never to play any of those gals, Chris Hayes included, because it just makes you dumber having to listen to them. But when you as a network are held hostage to someone who believes they can come on your network that they are blessed with a platform to have and savage the network for a decision, you should be disciplined. The problem is these days that so much of the talent is the brand, and it's just MSNBC's vehicle. Rachel Maddow doesn't need MSNBC. She doesn't really want to work at MSNBC anymore. That they can't really do anything to her for doing that if they want her to stay. There are some people where it's possible, but for most people, you can't do that. But I got to tell you, I guess it's the way I was raised. But the way I was raised is if someone is going to pay you a lot of money, you do not poop on their table. And if you poop in their toilet, you flush it like a good boy and clean up after yourself. Some of these wokes out there, the way they treat the people who employ them, a lot of them need to be fired. It's like some of these federal employees, like the ones who hung the flag upside down at El Capitan in Yosemite. They should be fired. They are supposed to be nonpartisan employees who work at the pleasure of the President of the United States. And if they want to complain and protest, they're showing their political views. This is different from Elon Musk, who's a political appointee. These people are civil servants. They're not supposed to have political opinions on the job. Fire them for doing so. And MSNBC should punish Rachel Maddow and the others for blasting the network, but they can't because they're held hostage to them, which is one reason Comcast is bailing on the network, which hardly gets any eyeballs anyway. We spent a lot of time focusing on the President of the United States. I was in a meeting the other day where one of the members of the meeting put it this way: Congress used to be a legislative body. Then it became a debating body. Then it became an entertaining society. And now most of the Republicans are a wholly owned subsidiary of Trump Inc., but there are some holdouts to that. Most members of Congress are predisposed to give Donald Trump what he wants. And what does Donald Trump want? Tax cuts. Senator Daines of Montana is one of the best senators in Washington, D.C., in my opinion. Great guy. Really phenomenal guy. And he wants to make Donald Trump's tax cuts permanent. And I do too. Senator Daines, I hope someone tells you, number one, I think you're awesome. And number two, I think you are making a ton of common sense when you say Donald Trump's tax cuts should be made permanent so that Democrats have a harder time getting rid of them next time they take over. Please get this done. Here's a problem. The House of Representatives. The House is always the problem. Let me go off on a tangent. The tangent is Mike Johnson. I also, by the way, I really like Mike Johnson. I'm delighted to finally have a Speaker of the House from Louisiana, even if he is a Yankee. Those of you listening down in Lafayette know how this works. Those of you in Baton Rouge listening, y'all know how this works. Mike Johnson, the fine congressman from Louisiana, lives north of Alexandria, Louisiana. Therefore, definitionally, he is a Yankee, even though no one else recognizes him as a Yankee. Those of us from Louisiana recognize Mike Johnson is basically from East Texas. If you know, you know. Mike Johnson is a good guy. Wears his heart on his sleeve, committed Christian, social conservative, fiscal conservative. He's the first actual really, truly social conservative first Speaker of the House the nation has ever seen. He's the first evangelical Christian to be Speaker of the House. I want to give the guy a chance. I like him. And I recognize he's in a very difficult position. He's in a really difficult position, y'all. Mike Johnson has, a 1 to 2 seat majority right now, in large part because Donald Trump appointed a bunch of people to office in the White House, and they should have like a 5 or 6 seat majority. They got like a 1 seat majority right now. You got Elise Stefanik, Mike Walls. I mean, who else is there? You got a number of members of the House of Representatives who went over to the Trump administration, and so you barely have a majority. And on top of that, they said, here, Mike, Mr. Speaker, come up with a tax cut. Come up with a budget plan. Congress still matters in that degree because Congress is the only body that can appropriate. I mean, there's a fight right now. Donald Trump is probably going to lose in the Supreme Court about impoundment. That means there's a law. Congress says if we tell the president to spend money, the president's got to spend the money. The best the president can do to stop spending the money is kick the can down the road for 10 months, I think. I think that's the way impoundment works. You within one calendar year, you can suspend the money, but you have to ultimately spend the money if Congress says spend the money. Congress still, at the end of the day, matters. Congress may be a largely worthless institution at this point, full of cranks who go on Newsmax and Steve Bannon's show and MSNBC and Democracy Now!, but they still, at the end of the day, have to pass budgets. The president can't do it all. And in the House of Representatives, the gentleman from Kentucky does not give two turds rubbed together to make magic, whether you care what he thinks or not. That would be Congressman Thomas Massie. Thomas Massie of Kentucky has been campaigned against by Donald Trump himself and won re-election. Thomas Massie is not scared of Donald Trump. Thomas Massie is scared of a massive, massive federal national debt that's going to destroy our country. The thing that keeps Thomas Massie up at night is, what are we going to do about all of our spending? We don't have a revenue problem. We have a spending problem in Washington, D.C. Thomas Massie knows it. He's an engine nerd. He is the nerdiest of engine nerds in Congress, one of the smartest people there. And he cares greatly about spending. And Mike Johnson is the dog that caught the car, who has to take a one-seat majority with Thomas Massie in it and Warren Davidson and Victoria, what's her name, from Indiana, and try to get all of them -1 to agree to a plan. And Warren Davidson has come out and said the House budget plan they hope to vote on tonight, he's opposed to it. Thomas Massie has come out and said he opposes to it. And, well, you can't get anything passed from the House now. On the Senate side, Lindsey Graham, Steve Daines, and others have come up with a plan. They want to do two pieces of legislation. See, the House wants to do one big, beautiful package, and Donald Trump has blessed the House effort. The House can't get it together. I am told very reliably that yesterday Steve Daines and several other members of the Senate went to Donald Trump and told him they want to make his tax cuts permanent. They don't want to keep having this fight. They don't want to, every 5 years, have the possibility of taxes automatically going up. They want to make his tax cuts permanent. So if Democrats want to raise taxes, they're going to own it. So they went to Donald Trump and they said, we think your tax cuts should be permanent. Donald Trump, I am told reliably, said, I agree. And the senators then said to Donald Trump, I'm told reliably, well, then we have a problem, Mr. President. What's the problem? I'm told reliably, Donald Trump asked them. And I'm told reliably they responded, well, Mr. President, you agree with us. Your tax cuts should be made permanent. The problem is the House of Representatives has authored a budget plan with $4.5 trillion in tax cuts that would make it impossible for us to make your tax cuts permanent. We need a different plan. So here's what's going to happen. The House budget is probably going to fail. This is the thing that, so tangent again. Let's talk about Chip Roy for a minute. Chip Roy, hands down, my favorite member of the House of Representatives. Tell Chip I said that so he stopped sending angry notes to my wife about me. Chip is a very good friend who occasionally sends my wife text messages reminding her to beat me up just to keep me humble. Chip is a great guy. Chip Roy is a difficult person for the Trump administration to deal with in Congress because they haven't quite figured out that Chip Roy doesn't care whether he loses his next election. And the moment you realize Chip Roy doesn't care whether or not he wins or loses the next election, you realize, now I know how to negotiate with Chip Roy. Take him at face value and try to accommodate his concerns. Thomas Massie is the same way. He's like Chip Roy. Thomas Massie doesn't care whether he wins or loses. Thomas Massie has won re-election, even with Donald Trump and all the Republicans and the MAGA crowd attacking him and trying to cost him his victory. He still won. He doesn't care at this point that you don't like that he can be the turd in the punch bowl. He's going to do what he needs to do to make a stand to cut spending. He can be reasonable to negotiate with, but oftentimes he digs in his heels, and they make it easy for him. So here's the way this is going to play out. The House probably, because Thomas Massie, Warren Davidson, and a few others, they're not going to vote for the budget plan. The House budget plan is going to die. So you know who's going to become the person driving the conversation? You might need to sit down for this one. You might need to sit down for this. You're not going to like it. If the House Republicans kill Mike Johnson's budget plan tonight, you know who becomes the person driving the conversation? That would be your favorite senator from South Carolina, Lindsey Graham. He gets to author the plan in the Senate. He already has tried to sell the president on a 2-bill plan. What does this mean? The Senate will divide Donald Trump's policies and proposals into 2 plans. One will be about the border and national security. The other will be about tax cuts. They will do the border and national security plan first. They will do the tax cuts second. And the House will have to suck it up and go along with it. And if any of the Republicans in the House dare to try to kill the plan in the Senate, there will be hell to pay from Donald Trump. Now, a guy like Thomas Massie doesn't care. But he also, Thomas Massie, understands Republicans want to win. Republicans want to win. Chip Roy understands Republicans need a win. Warren Davidson understands if Republicans can't get a win on President Trump's tax cuts, not only do taxes automatically go up, but the markets automatically crash. If the Republicans cannot show that they govern, the markets are going to go into turmoil, and the bond rate's probably going to go up, and that's going to cause even higher interest payments on the national debt. There's going to be cascading effects if Republicans signal to Wall Street they're incapable of governing. They got to come up with a plan. And everybody from Thomas Massie to Speaker Johnson to Lindsey Graham to Steve Daines to John Thune to Donald Trump, they know they've got to come up with a plan. The biggest problem for the GOP is the government shuts down in about 3-4 weeks, and the Democrats aren't playing nice. The Democrats aren't going to compromise. The Democrats want nothing to do with helping the GOP unless the GOP reigns in Doge, and the GOP has no interest in reigning in Doge. There's just not an easy way for any of them to navigate right now. At the end of the day, the lesson is that Congress still matters. At the end of the day, the lesson is individual members of Congress, because of the narrow majority in the House, have inordinate clout to do what they want to do. And some of them have resisted Donald Trump repeatedly in elections, and so they simply do not care what Donald Trump says. And Donald Trump and the Republicans are going to have to figure out a way to cut a deal with them. The problem for Donald Trump and these Republicans is, what do these guys care about most? Spending. What do they want? Bigger cuts. And what happens when you cut things? You get people angry because everything you cut has a natural constituency. So how do you make this happen and refuse to deal with entitlements? Because Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, they're the biggest things that need reform. And Donald Trump says don't touch them, and the House isn't touching them. This isn't going to end well for the Republicans unless they can come up with a plan. And to Donald Trump's credit, his leadership skill comes in handy there. It's very Calvin Coolidge. Calvin Coolidge is my favorite president. You see 10 troubles bounding down the road, stand still. 9 out of 10 of them will bound off the road before you get there. Donald Trump's not quite Calvin Coolidge. His is, when you see 2 guys fighting, let's see who wins the fight before we step in. Right now, you got the House guys fighting the Senate guys. See which side wins, and then step in and take a position. He's letting them sort it out. The problem is the House is where this should start, but the House guys are too busy fighting each other, which means the Senate guys are going to walk all over them in negotiations, and we're going to have a long, drawn-out spending fight this year. This is actually, believe it or not, related to all of that. Chris Rufo and Hannah Grossman at City Journal are revealing private chats at the National Security Agency. The National Security Agency is a highly secretive group of spies who do a lot of signal intelligence. They capture data from around the world and analyze it. The intelligence community, they write, is one of the most powerful parts of the American national security apparatus. In theory, it works tirelessly to keep the nation safe, but according to internal documents that we obtained, some intelligence agency employees have another on-the-job priority: sex chats. We have cultivated sources within the National Security Agency. That sentence alone is worth the price of admission for this story. We have cultivated sources within the spooks, the National Security Agency. One current employee and one former employee who have provided chat logs for the NSA's Interlink messaging program. According to an NSA press official, all NSA employees sign agreements stating that publishing non-mission-related material on Interlink is a usage violation and will result in disciplinary action. Nonetheless, these logs, dating back 2 years, are lurid, featuring wide-ranging discussions of sex, kink, polyamory, and castration. One popular chat topic was male-to-female transgender surgery, which involves surgically removing the male organ and turning it into an artificial, a female organ, essentially by turning it inside out. I'm not going to gag. Mine is everything, said one male who claimed to have had gender reconstruction surgery. I found that I like being, I don't even want to talk to y'all about this. We're just going to skip that part. Another intelligence official boasted that genital surgery allowed him to wear leggings or bikinis without having to wear anything under it. These employees discussed hair removal, estrogen injections, and the experience of sexual pleasure after a castration. One talked about getting their rear end zapped with a laser. One transgender identifying Intel employee who spent thousands on hair removal said, "Look, I just enjoy helping other people experience boobs," says another after estrogen treatments. "One of the weirdest things that gives me euphoria is when I pee, I don't have to push anything down to make sure it aims right," says a defense intelligence employee. The revelations come at a moment of heightened scrutiny for the Intel community. According to one source, the sex chats were legitimized as part of the NSA's commitment to, there it is, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Activists within the agency used LGBTQ+ employee resource groups to turn their kinks and pathologies into official work duties. According to the current NSA employee, these groups spent all day recruiting activists and holding meetings with titles such as privilege, ally awareness, pride, and transgender community inclusion, and they did so with the full support of NSA leadership, which declared that DEI was not only mission critical, but mission imperative. I was on my treadmill yesterday watching CNBC, and they were interviewing some female leader of a home building corporation. And they decided they needed to ask her about why DEI was so important to the mission of her business. There is an elite segment of this society in and out of government that really believes DEI is all it goes. Not hiring the best people, but hiring the most diverse people. Now, I say this is relevant to the Ukraine stuff. It is in this regard. Whether you want to believe it or not, and some people on the right just flat out refuse to make eye contact with it because it would shatter their worldview right now. Whether you want to believe it or not, China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea are colluding together to undermine the Western world order. And who leads the Western world order? Us. You may say good riddance. We're a terrible, awful nation at this point. Don't you know we're systemically racist? Or wait, no, that's the woke left. What the woke right says is, don't you know we're so into DEI we deserve it. The woke left and the woke right both hate America. China, Russia, North Korea, Iran, they wish to take over the world. They don't just want a sphere of influence. And this is the mind-numbing thing to me. There are people who think, well, Russia wants Europe, China wants Asia, we'll have the Western Hemisphere. Y'all, that's profoundly stupid, misguided talk. Russia wants a Russian sphere of influence. China wants everything. Have you not read the writings of Xi Jinping? Am I the only person here who bothers to read this stuff? Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin together have written like joint missives on upending the global order and replacing what is now with something that will be. They want an end to the American sphere of influence globally. They're not going to give us the Western Hemisphere. For God's sakes, China's already involved in business deals all over Central and South America just to try to shut us out. And meanwhile, our spooks are busy constructing fake female organs and talking about how they're peeing standing up. And their polyamory classes. The Western world is going to get beat because we put weirdos, freaks, and people with deviant pathologies in charge in the name of diversity, equity, and inclusion. These people can't beat China. They can't beat Russia. They have pathologies and deviancies that they're way more interested in than our national security. Exposing this sort of stuff that has polluted the Western elite, polluted the minds of our intelligence community is a necessary thing. Chris Rufo has done a good job here in City Journal exposing these pathologies, and they need to be rooted out and driven out of our intelligence community. If every moment of the day that our NSA employees are bragging about, quote, getting their butthole zapped by a laser, that is a moment they're not thinking about China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran. They need to be purged. They need to be driven out. They need to be gone. We have a global fight ahead of us. And we need people willing to fight that fight instead of stand around talking about their gender reassignment surgery. I want to play for you some audio, if I can here, of Hakeem Jeffries with Rachel Maddow.
Well, it's certainly the case that we understand the scale of the threat. That can't be doubted. The CBC, which I'm a part of, definitively understands the scale of the threat. Our communities have been under siege, as you pointed out, since before the Civil War. I'm a direct descendant of those very communities, so we understand the struggle, the history, the strength of people like John Lewis, which we're going to channel. That's my experience. That's my personal experience. That's my family's experience. And so we understand that. And as a caucus, it's definitively the case that we understand that.
Tying it all to the Civil War and the fight in John Lewis, there's a cigar company in Atlanta, ATL Cigars. They're actually really good. They have a cigar named after John Lewis. It's called the Good Trouble cigar. It's actually a very good cigar. It's my favorite of theirs. Good people. There was a famous line. John Lewis, the civil rights leader turned congressman from Georgia, would encourage people to get up to good trouble. And the Democrats have taken that, and they think that essentially all trouble is good trouble if it is trouble against people they disagree with. But there's a problem. When I was a conservative activist and running political campaigns, I would point out regularly that if every hill is a hill to die on, you're going to wind up dead a lot. You're just going to keep dying. And this isn't video game reboot. I mean, you die on one hill, you respawn, you go die on the other hill. There's no win in the game. You're spending so many of your resources just dying on hills. There's just blood everywhere. There's no point. There's no point. James Carville has a piece in the New York Times today essentially telling Democrats, slow down. Slow your roll. I want to get into that, but I got to begin by going off to Wisconsin. I'm not going to play you the audio. But in Wisconsin, they signed an update to the Family Law Code of Wisconsin. Do you know what the word mother is now in the law, and I wish I were making it up. I promise you I'm not making it up. It's a real thing. In Wisconsin now, in the family code, they have replaced mother with inseminated person. You know what father is now? Inseminator. It's in the show notes today. You can see it for yourself. You know what? I might as well. Let me rearrange my mixer here on the fly. I'm pretty handy with this. This is Tony Evers, who is the governor of Wisconsin, who was completely unprepared. He was asked by a local TV station, WLUK, about this. Well, I guess they don't want to play the audio now here. Sorry, folks. The audio is not coming up. But essentially, what he said was he had no answer for it. He had no answer at all for why you would refer to someone who is a mother as
gender neutral.
There we go.
What was behind that decision, and do you stand by it?
Of course I do. It's absolutely, what the Republicans say is a lie. So of course I'm pretty PO'd about that. All this does, it gives people a chance that are using IVF, which I think Republicans are kind of okay with that. Have certainty, legal certainty about a mom being able to, to have a year worth of care. So that's it. And so I didn't know that Republicans were against IVF, but apparently they are, because that is what it's about. Moms are moms, dads are dads, and what we want is legal certainty that we're able to that moms are able to get the care they need. That's it. End of story. You can count on this being, something that the Republicans are becoming very good at, and that is lying. And it's really unfortunate that we're in this position.
Except they didn't lie, and he can't defend it. He's trying to deflect to make this about IVF. It's not. Tony Evers, the governor of Wisconsin, signed a law that changes the phrase mother in family law in Wisconsin to inseminated person. Now, I got to apologize that I don't even want to have to use the word, but that literally is now the law that he changed. And father is now inseminator, and it doesn't just apply to IVF. He himself is lying about that. The Democrats can't help themselves with this. They can't help themselves. And you don't have to take my word for it. If you text data to 33777, get the show notes. It's in the show notes. You can see it for yourself. The governor of Wisconsin has changed the law in Wisconsin, so now the phrase mother is replaced by inseminated person. That's what he did. And now he's saying Republicans are lying for the audacity of pointing out the law that he signed. The problem here is Democrats are held hostage by woke. If Donald Trump and the right hate it, they love it. And the problem is they're allowing themselves to be defined by what Republicans like or hate, and they're being defined by the opposite, as opposed to what do the people of the United States think? What do the people of the United States think? And I can assure you that Americans don't call mothers inseminated person, and they don't call fathers inseminators. I can assure you that most Americans, in fact, I've seen the polling from the New York Times, that most Americans think the country has swung too far into the corner of the trans movement, and a correction is due, because most Americans do not believe that men can become women or women can become men. They think we should be compassionate. They think we should show empathy. They think we should be kind, but they don't actually think that we should bend over backwards and say, oh my gosh, you're now a woman. And they certainly don't think boys should be in girls' sports. And the left can't help themselves. They've doubled down on this sort of stuff. Here's James Carville. With no clear leader to voice our opposition and no control in any branch of government, it's time for Democrats to embark on the most daring political maneuver in the history of our party. Roll over and play dead. Allow the Republicans to crumble beneath their own weight and make the American people miss us. Only until the Trump administration has spiraled into the low 40s or high 30s in public approval polling percentages should we make like a pack of hyenas and go for the jugular. Until then, I'm calling for a strategic political retreat. The Army has a term for this, tactical pause. It's a vision move. Get out of the hour-to-hour, day-to-day combat where one side, ours, the Democrats in his mind, is largely playing defense and struggling to defend politically charged positions like explaining DEI or persuading voters to care about foreign aid, and take time to regroup, look forward, and make decisions about where we want to get to over the next 2 years. I don't think a lot of Americans are waiting around for us to use the same old arguments and same old language to pile on Donald Trump. They're tired of it. And our Democratic voters are tired of watching us moan and groan to cover up our impotency out of power. They want us to be smarter than that. Our first major test is the art of strategic retreat comes in a few weeks as the Trump administration might get a budget passed that raises the debt ceiling. There are deep internal Republican divides over the budget. Republicans don't know what they want to include. They don't agree on an agenda. They don't have a clear path forward. Mr. Trump has asked for an abolishment of the debt ceiling. The Speaker of the House, his close ally, has yet to definitively support him on it. Already, many Democrats across the party are itching for a showdown. Instead of gearing up to fight them, as we love to do, the most radical thing we can do is nothing at all. Let the Republicans disagree with themselves publicly. Do not offer a single vote. Do not insert yourself into the discourse. Do not throw a monkey wrench into the equation. Simply step away and let them flirt with a default. Just when they push themselves to the brink and it appears they could collapse the global economy, come in and save the day. Be the competent party, not the chaos party. House Democrats know this. It's time for everyone in our party, including the darlings who want to run in 2028, to understand this as well. You won't win or achieve anything meaningful going toe-to-toe with the Trump administration right now. The equation must be applied for the remainder of this year. Let the Republicans push for their tax cuts, their Medicaid cuts, their food stamp cuts, give them all the rope they need, then let dysfunctional paralysis within their House caucus rupture their tiny majority. Let them reveal themselves incapable of governing. Honestly, it's good advice from James Carville. It's actually the best advice that the Democrats could take. Do nothing. I got to tell you, you privately talk to Republicans. Republicans fear this. So like one person in the House of Representatives can scuttle the whole agenda. Trump wants tariffs. Trump said today, tariffs are coming back. Tariffs are going to come in full. That could hurt the economy. The markets aren't acting that way today, you should know. The Dow's up. But there's a lot of worry that Trump's tariffs could wreck the economy, and he's going to get the blame. If inflation doesn't come under control, he's going to get the blame. If egg prices continue to stay high for 6 more months, he's going to get the blame. Republicans are going to get the blame for all this. Democrats just stay out of the way. Stay out of the way. But there's an undercurrent to what James Carville is talking about as well. And that is Democrats can't help but go down the woke rabbit holes of calling mothers inseminated persons. They can't help but go down the woke rabbit hole and want boys and girls sports. They can't help but do that. And if the Democrats are out doing that stuff, all it's going to do to the American public is remind the American public why they hate the Democrats. I'm all for them doing that. And here's why I think we win and Carville loses. Because the Democrats can't help themselves. The Democrats don't listen to James Carville anymore, even though they should. He's got a record of winning presidencies. What they're listening to are the wokes on MSNBC, the Rachel Maddows and the Chris Hayeses and the people who want them to fight on every hill, die on every hill. They want them to do this. They want them to fight all the time. They think that a good message will rise out of the bloodshed of dying on every hill. The Democrats cannot help themselves on this, and that works to the Republican advantage. Because every time the Democrats come out and take out a position, like with the federal job losses, the media and the Democrats are far more sympathetic to federal employees losing their jobs than to all the people who are out of jobs because Jo-Ann Fabric is closing down. Where are the sob story interviews with the people losing their jobs from Jo-Ann Fabric? There aren't going to be any. They're too busy interviewing the federal employees, the bureaucrats who are losing their jobs. The Democrats cannot help but step on their own toes as they try to fight Donald Trump. They should listen to James Carville. It's good free advice. But they're not going to take it because they've decided the fight is more important than winning. The moral victory from the fight is the most important thing to Democrats. So they can have lots of moral victories and lots of defeats. So James Carville tells Democrats, disappear for a little while. Let the Republicans collapse under their own weight. You know another reason Democrats strategically for their own benefit should disappear? Because right now, what are the Democrats doing? They're defending foreign aid that went to pay for a lesbian troop in Southeast Asia and campaigns on circumcision for men in Mozambique and other very wild things that no American of reasonable mind can think are worth spending money on. Additionally, the Democrats are defending federal employees losing their jobs. Can you imagine the working class mother of three who's making slightly more than minimum wage this week at Jo-Ann Fabrics, who has been told she's going to be out of a job in about 3 weeks? Jo-Ann Fabrics, my wife and my daughter have apparently, I am shocked to learn, not spent enough to keep them in business. My wife quilts. She and my daughter and even my son are into some serious arts and crafts. Yeah, they go to Michael's. Well, because Jo-Ann's is a pain in the butt to deal with. I have to go in there sometimes. I got to tell you. So I told my wife that Jo-Ann Fabric was going out of business, and her first response was, well, they killed everybody off with those cinnamon brooms they keep at the door during the autumn. I'm not kidding. So my Aunt Shirley, God rest her soul, she actually wasn't my aunt. She was my mom's best friend when I was growing up. Called her my Aunt Shirley. My Aunt Shirley was allergic to cinnamon. Allergic to the only person I've ever known who was actually literally allergic to cinnamon and could not in the fall go to these grocery stores with those cinnamon brooms. Jo-Ann Fabric's one of those stores. Couldn't go to it because cinnamon brooms. And Jo-Ann Fabric now going out of business. There are 800 Jo-Ann Fabric stores going out of business around the country. Where will the sad media profiles be of those employees? This stuff happens every day. Where are the tragic stories of the laid off 1,100 Starbucks managers? Is the ABC News, the NBC News, the CBS News, are any of them going to cover this? Or are they going to do profiles of the employees who have lost their jobs? You certainly don't want to be, well, to use the pig Latin, ick day, Elon Musk, putting an autistic billionaire in charge of laying people off. Probably not the best look, given some of the ways this has been handled and some of the people who were laid off, and then the government had to go back and beg them to come back to work. But it's not like it doesn't need to happen. Now, look, there are some concerns. Here is Senator Lisa Murkowski, who was talking. She got ambushed on Capitol Hill by a reporter with a microphone, and she's talking about the Doge employees and the layoffs and her concerns.
When the executive basically blows by Congress or rolls right over Congress, and we allow that, we're ceding our responsibility. I believe that you can absolutely be a 100% supporter of President Trump and still stand up for the institution of the Senate, for the legislative branch with our authorities that are prescribed to us specifically by the Constitution. And so, But if we don't, if we just say, well, we like his policies, and so therefore we're going to cede some of our authorities, don't think that this is the last time you're going to see that.
And, Trump can't afford to anger people like Murkowski because they only have a 53-seat majority in the Senate, and she's perfectly willing to defy Donald Trump and has in the past. They don't get along. So you can't alienate members of Congress, and Doge sending out emails saying, name 5 things you did last week, and then Elon Musk going on Twitter saying, if you don't answer, you're going to get fired. That's the system. The Supreme Court, put it to you this way, let's take Erickson out of this. I think that's a crummy way to do it. You send people an email, don't tell them you have to respond or be fired, and then Elon Musk goes on Twitter and says if they don't respond, they're going to get fired. Well, you didn't put it in the email. You should have put it in the email. Forget my opinion on that, though. The Supreme Court is process-oriented. John Roberts has authored 2 opinions directed at the Trump administration where the Trump administration was on the losing side, and both times John Roberts said, you can do exactly what you want to do, but you have to follow the process in order to do it. So Doge does have to be careful with how he does with how they fire these people, but it's absurd to have the Democrats on television defending federal employees who lost their jobs when no one's going to shed a tear over the unemployed from Starbucks. No one's going to shed a tear over the unemployed from Joanne Fabric. No one sheds a tear of the millions of layoffs that happen a year in the private sector. But God almighty, you lay off 10 incompetent employees in the federal government, and it's a national nightmare, as if these people their jobs are sacrosanct. It's offensive to people, and that's one of the things Carville, in his op-ed to the Democrats, doesn't want to say, but Democrats get a clue. You shed no tears when jobs are lost in the private sector and cry over somebody in the federal government losing their job. You're telling Americans, unless you work for the government, you don't matter. And most Americans actually don't like the government. It's just a wild standard there. And for the Democrats to rush out and defend USAID, but they can't actually defend spending your tax dollars to teach men in Mozambique about circumcision, it's just the wildest thing to see. This is what we were spending money on, a lesbian acting troupe in Burma, for God's sakes. That's what your taxpayer dollars went to. I dare the Democrats to try to defend that stuff. They can't do it. They have to make a holistic argument. Oh, we can't end USAID. Oh, we can't lay off federal employees. You can lay off that federal employee. That guy's an idiot. Come back. It is Erickson here. The White House is announcing today for the first time in a very, very, very long time that the White House press pool is going to be upended by the White House. In the past, the White House Correspondents Association has organized the press pool. Now, what is the press pool? It's the group that covers the president, and also in the press pool, there tends to be a handful of people, sometimes down to just one person, who will, in sensitive things, travel with the president. So there's always someone there. For example, when the president goes to, for example, Camp David, there is one member of the press who is always there to film the helicopter as it lands, just in case, morbidly so, something happens. And then when it takes off, there always is. Well, Carolyn Leavitt, the White House press secretary, is announcing that the president's team is now going to be deciding who is in the press pool, in large part because they want to diversify the voices, to add podcasters, social media influencers, non-traditional media outlets. They'll still make room for traditional media outlets. The fact of the matter is, though, as much as reporters are venting about this right now, the reality is press institutions are largely meaningless at this point. If Rachel Maddow can go on a tirade on MSNBC about MSNBC, MSNBC really is meaningless if there are no repercussions. That's just the reality of it. Joe Rogan gets more eyeballs on his content than anybody at MSNBC. So they're going to redo this. They're going to shake it up. The press can vent all they want about it, but this is big news from the White House. The daily group of reporters covering the press is now going to be selected by the White House press office of the White House Correspondents Association. Thus ends a long-held relationship, and honestly, I mean, given how liberal the White House Correspondents Association is, I don't blame the Trump administration for doing it.